This is Copenhagen. It's a city with long winters, no mountains, and it isn't a global economic hub in any regard really. Yet despite this, in 2025, it was ranked the #1 most livable city in the world, with perfect scores of 100 in stability, education, and infrastructure. Not only this though, it also completed an incredible trifecta by also being ranked the #1 happiest and #1 most sustainable city in the world. But how did it do this? How did a small Scandinavian capital achieve as close to perfection as we've seen when comparing it to other cities around the world? Well, the answer doesn't start with bicycles or Scandinavian minimalism. It starts with a sketch of a hand drawn on a piece of paper in 1947, and a series of decisions that most cities around the world were too afraid or too short-sighted to make. But first, how did we get there? Well, we don't need to go much into its early history, but rather the real turning point for Copenhagen's identity came in 1853, when a cholera epidemic tore through the city's overcrowded working-class districts. It was devastating, but it directly inspired something that would define Copenhagen for the next century and beyond: its first philanthropic housing project. It was called Bromlebo, built just outside the old city walls with better sanitation, clean air, and green space. It was organized by a group of doctors who essentially said, if the city won't house its people properly, we will. The first national law supporting public housing construction followed in 1887, and by 1933, non-profit affordable housing became statutory in Denmark. This is the foundation of what would become the Almene Boliger system, aka their non-profit social housing system, but we'll get into that later. Around the same time as the cholera crisis, Copenhagen was also tearing down its old military fortifications. The removal of the medieval walls in the 1850s through the 1870s opened up land for expansion, and this is when the districts of Nørrebro, Vesterbro, and Østerbro were born, neighborhoods that are still central to the identity of Copenhagen today. Finally, we get to the single most important planning decision in Copenhagen's history, the 1947 Finger Plan. After World War II, Copenhagen needed a vision for how to grow. The city hadn't been destroyed like Berlin or Tokyo, but it was under enormous pressure from population growth and the beginnings of suburbanization. So two Danish architects, Peter Bredsdorff and Steen Eiler Rasmussen, along with their team from the private Danish Urban Planning Lab, drew up a regional development plan that would become iconic, with the Copenhagen Regional Planning Office then implementing it. The idea was beautifully simple. Copenhagen would develop like a hand. The dense urban core, the city center, was the palm, and 5 fingers of urban development would radiate outward from it, each one centered on an S-train commuter rail line. Between the fingers would be protected green wedges for agriculture and recreation, no building allowed. What that finger plan meant in practice was the outward suburban expansion along those 5 S-train corridors instead of letting it sprawl out in every direction. Every community was clustered around a train station with the green spaces between. Transit came first, development followed. This is the exact opposite of what happened in most American cities, where highways came first and sprawl followed. Even today, you can stand in a suburb along one of the 5 fingers and within minutes be in open countryside or parkland. The genius of it was the simplicity. The image of a hand with spread fingers graced the cover of the original document, and it became instantly recognizable. Everyone was able to understand it. It's still the basis for all regional planning in the Copenhagen metro area almost 80 years later. And in 2006, it was added to Denmark's official list of celebrated cultural icons. That's how important it is. It's literally a national treasure. But what makes Copenhagen truly remarkable is how this foundation translated into the specific design choices and policies that shape the city we see today. And it starts with how people move through it. Or actually, it starts with you subscribing to the channel. Don't forget. See, here's what's crazy. Copenhagen almost lost their cycling culture entirely. I know it sounds wrong, but it's true. After World War II, just like almost every other Western city, cars started to take over. As incomes rose and the suburbs expanded in the 1950s, new roads were built without bicycle infrastructure. Intersections were redesigned to prioritize car flow. By the 1960s, city planners were actively considering removing some of the existing bike lanes. There were even proposals to build a motorway straight through Copenhagen's iconic Lake District in the city center. The city was heading in the exact same direction as most American cities. By 1972, the percentage of trips made by bike dropped to an all-time low of just 10%. and their comprehensive electric tram network was replaced by buses. But then came the 1973 oil crisis. When oil prices quadrupled almost overnight, Denmark, which was almost completely dependent on imported oil at the time, was hit hard. The government introduced car-free Sundays as an emergency measure, and something unexpected happened. People loved them. As one account put it, many Copenhageners thought it was the best day of the week. What followed was a grassroots revolution. Membership in the Danish Cyclists Federation, which had been on life support for years, exploded almost overnight. Thousands of people demonstrated outside Copenhagen's City Hall, demanding that cycling be prioritized again, and the city government listened. During the 1980s, driven largely by committed civil servants and sustained political pressure, Copenhagen developed a citywide bikeway plan and built out 240 kilometers of separated cycle lanes. The core design principle, which had actually been in place in some form for over a century, was simple. One-way cycle tracks on both sides of all major roads, raised slightly above car level, physically separated from both vehicles and pedestrians. Cars park on the outside of the tracks, not between the track and the sidewalk. It's so distinctive that other cities around the world literally call adding bike infrastructure Copenhagenization. And this all worked. Between 1990 and 2000, the distance traveled by bicycle in Copenhagen increased by 40%, while cycling-related injuries dropped by 30%. And the numbers today are staggering. 62% of Copenhagen residents commute to work or school by bicycle. Every single day, 1.2 million kilometers are cycled in the city. To put that into perspective, almost as many people commute by bike in Greater Copenhagen alone as do in the entire United States combined. There's over 400 kilometers of cycle lanes across the city. But it's not just the lanes, it's the details too. Copenhagen has green wave systems, which are dedicated bicycle traffic lights timed to cycling speed, typically around 20 kilometers per hour, so that if you maintain a steady pace, you'll hit green light after green light through an entire corridor. There are footrests at intersections so you don't have to put your foot down while waiting. Tilted garbage bins along the bike lanes so you can toss trash without stopping. Bicycle air pumps built right into the streetscape. These are tiny things individually, but collectively they're what separate a city that allows cycling from one that's designed for it. Today, only about 29% of Copenhagen residents own cars. Cycling has genuinely displaced driving as the default mode of transportation. And when you remove cars from the equation, you remove noise, pollution, congestion, and the need for enormous parking infrastructure, freeing up space for everything else. Since the 1970s, 18 parking lots have been converted into public spaces. Now, the cycling revolution didn't happen in a vacuum. It was part of a broader philosophical shift in how Copenhagen thought about public space, and a lot of that traces back to one street and one architect. In 1962, a decade before the oil crisis, Copenhagen's main shopping street, Strøget, was pedestrianized. It was one of the first major streets in Europe to go completely car-free, and it was hugely controversial. Newspapers ran headlines like, "We are Danes, not Italians." Critics argued that public street life was fundamentally contrary to the reserved Nordic mentality. Shopkeepers feared it would destroy their businesses. To ease the opposition, the city even framed it as a temporary trial, almost disguising it as an extended holiday closure. But it worked. Within the first year, pedestrian traffic surged by 35%. Businesses didn't suffer, they thrived. The experiment was made permanent in 1964, and over the next few decades, the pedestrian network expanded from Strøget's original 15,800 square meters to over 100,000 square meters of car-free space. The architect who studied all of this from the very beginning was a man named Jan Gehl. Starting in 1962, Gehl used Strøget as a living laboratory, spending years observing how people actually use public space, where they walk, sit, gather, and interact. His findings became the intellectual foundation for everything Copenhagen did next. His philosophy can be summed up in one line: life, space, buildings, in that order. Design for the people first, then figure out the spaces they need. Then build the buildings around that, not the other way around. Gehl's influence didn't stay in Copenhagen. He's consulted for New York City, London, Moscow, Sydney, and many more iconic cities. The entire concept of Copenhagenization, which started with bike lanes, really traces back to Gehl's broader idea that cities should be designed for people, not vehicles. Copenhagen essentially wrote the playbook that other cities around the world are now trying to follow. Speaking of how people move, there's also the public transportation aspect, because Copenhagen's system is one of the most impressive in Europe for a city of its size. The backbone is the S-train. It's been running since the 1930s and is the transit skeleton of the Finger Plan. There are now 170 kilometers of track, 7 lines, and 87 stations, with trains converging as frequently as every 5 to 10 minutes through the city center. Then there's the Copenhagen Metro. It opened only in 2002, which is incredibly late compared to other European capitals like Paris or London's, which opened a century earlier. But even when compared to fellow Scandinavian countries, Stockholm's opened in 1950 and Oslo's in 1966. But Copenhagen used that lateness to its advantage. The metro was driverless from day one, fully automated with no operators on the trains. Along with the New York subway and Chicago's L system, their metro is one of only 3 rapid transit systems in the world to operate 24/7. It runs every 2 to 4 minutes during peak hours. There are 4 lines with 44 stations, carrying 135 million passengers annually. Everything, the metro, S-train, buses, and even harbor ferries, operates on a single integrated ticket system. One zone-based fare covers all modes. Wherever you are in Copenhagen, you're almost never more than a few minutes walk from some form of public transport. Now, if we're to shift to housing, Denmark's social housing system is called almene boliger, which translates to common housing. And the key word there is common, not social. Unlike in the UK or the United States, where social housing is often seen as a last resort for the poorest, Denmark's system was designed from the very beginning for everyone, from students to families to the elderly. It's run by non-profit housing associations, not the government directly, and it makes up 20% of Denmark's entire housing stock, around 500,000 homes nationally. On top of that, housing cooperatives, andelsboliger, make up another 7% nationally, but a massive 30% of housing in Copenhagen specifically. The way it works is that rents are cost-based, not market-based. 1 in every 4 vacancies in the almene boliger system is allocated by the local municipality for social purposes. This could mean housing the homeless, key workers, newly divorced families, or anyone the city identifies as being in need. What's particularly important, and this is something Copenhagen shares with Vienna, its rival for being the most livable city, is that the social housing isn't segregated to one part of the city. The system deliberately scatters subsidized homes across all districts, mixed in with market rate and cooperative housing. This prevents concentrated poverty and keeps neighborhoods diverse and stable, which is a big part of why Copenhagen is consistently ranked as one of the safest cities in Europe. It's not perfect though. Waiting lists for social housing in Copenhagen can stretch for years, and private market prices have risen sharply like everywhere else, especially in recent years. But compared to cities like London, Sydney, or Amsterdam, where housing crises have spiraled to the point of social emergency, Copenhagen's system has held up remarkably well. On the climate side, Copenhagen reduced its CO2 emissions by 75% between 2005 and 2024, which is a dramatic figure. Over 25% of the city is classified as green space, and Denmark as a whole has 50% of their electricity coming from renewable energy. In fact, they came first in the EU in the share of renewables in net electricity generation in 2024, and third in Europe. But maybe the most impressive part might be the water. Copenhagen's harbour is clean enough to swim in, and it has been for years. Public swimming places like Islandsbrygger Havnebadet sit right in the harbour, and you'll see locals swimming in the summer just a short metro ride from the city centre. Compare this to Paris, which only recently opened select sections of the Seine for public bathing and made global headlines for it. Copenhagen has been doing this quietly for decades, thanks to strict upstream pollution controls, natural filtration, and ongoing environmental monitoring. And unlike Paris, you're allowed to swim pretty much anywhere along Copenhagen's harbour, not just at designated points. Now, at this point, you might be wondering, how can a single city actually pull all this off? And the answer is in the power of the local government. Denmark has a very decentralized government system that lets municipalities operate with considerable independence from the national government. According to the OECD, local governments in Denmark account for over 60% of government spending, the highest level among other advanced nations, which are on average around 36%. Part of this comes from an annual block grant that the local authorities receive from the national government, which is negotiated annually by Local Government Denmark, basically the National Federation of Municipalities, and the National Ministry of Finance. The negotiation process gives local officials input in national policy that would be unprecedented almost anywhere else. All of this adds up to something that's hard to quantify but very easy to feel: happiness. Copenhagen consistently ranks among the happiest cities in the world, and in 2025 it was named the happiest outright, despite being a relatively cold country. Denmark's broader welfare model creates the baseline. Taxes are high, among the highest in the world. But those taxes fund universal healthcare, free education through university, generous parental leave, and more. This creates a foundation of security that reduces stress and inequality in ways that compound over time. People aren't constantly worried about going bankrupt from a hospital bill or drowning in student debt, and the city's design amplifies it. When your commute is a 15-minute bike ride instead of an hour in traffic, when green space is a few minutes walk from wherever you are, daily life just feels different. There's a Danish concept for this feeling called hygge, which is often translated as coziness or contentedness. But it's more than that. It's a cultural value around enjoying the everyday. Of course, Copenhagen isn't without its challenges. It's expensive, and immigration remains a complex issue. The gentrification pressures that come with being named the best city in the world are real, and they threaten the diversity that the Almene Boliger system was designed to protect. But these are the kinds of problems that come from success, not from failure. And Copenhagen's track record suggests it has the institutional capacity and political willingness to address them, because it's addressed equally daunting challenges before. Thank you for watching.